There's one kind of silence that speaks louder than words ever could, especially when your success enters the room before you do. You know that moment when something good happens in your life and instead of celebration, you feel a subtle shift, a coolness, a delay, instead of, that's amazing. That's soft jealousy, and it rarely shows up wearing a name tag. Hey, I'm Susie, and this is where we get real about emotional intelligence, friendship red flags, subtle jealousy, and those energy shifts in relationships that don't scream at you, but whisper just loud enough for your intuition to hear. Because sometimes what we call, I'm just overthinking or maybe imagining it, is actually your internal compass picking up on unsupportive friends, passive aggressive behavior, sketchy actions, or even a little green envy in relationships that haven't been spoken out loud yet. And here's the truth. By the end of this episode of Signals and Standards, you're going to understand how to recognize those subtle dynamics without spiraling, without shrinking, and without abandoning yourself just to keep the peace. So stay with us. Welcome to Signals and Standards with Suzie, where we decode mixed messages, elevate your standards, and deliver practical insights that you can act on. I'm your empowerment coach, Suzie, here to guide you from confusion to clarity, helping you reclaim your power and create the relationships and life you deserve. Jealousy in friendships is one of those emotionally complicated experiences because it rarely shows up clean and clear. My research explored across various sources on the topic point to something important here. Jealousy isn't just about wanting what someone else has. It's often rooted in insecurity, in comparison. It's rooted in the nervous system's threat response when someone we care about starts to grow beyond the version of themselves we're used to. And in friendships, that can feel surprisingly personal because when you change, it can unconsciously make someone else feel like they're being left behind, even if you haven't actually gone anywhere. And I want you to really picture this. Think of it like standing in a room where the lighting shifts because a window has been opened. You didn't turn the lights off. You didn't change the structure of the room. You just expanded the amount of light coming in. And suddenly, some people are squinting. They're uncomfortable. Not because you did something wrong, but because their eyes are still adjusting. That adjustment phase is where soft jealousy lives. But here's where it gets even more nuanced. That internal discomfort doesn't always get processed directly. Instead, it leaks out in subtle behaviors that don't always have a name attached to them. A slightly delayed, that's amazing, or a compliment that lands just a little sideways, a tone that doesn't really match the moment, something feeling just off. Nothing overt enough to confront, but enough that your body pauses for half a second and thinks, did I imagine that? And that pause absolutely matters because emotional intelligence, as discussed across psychological perspectives on envy and relational growth, isn't just about understanding others. It's about learning to trust your internal read of energy without immediately invalidating it. You stop gaslighting your intuition and start asking a more grounded question. What is this dynamic revealing to me about how safe I feel being fully myself here? This is where the concept sometimes referred to as friendvy comes so relevant. It describes that overlapping space where friendship and envy coexist, where someone can genuinely care about you but still feel triggered by your progress. And that duality is what makes it so confusing because it doesn't feel like conflict. It feels like tension without a clear source, like a conversation that almost happened but didn't. And if you've ever had a friendship where you feel both close and slightly edited at the same time, you know exactly what that does to you. You start managing your wins, you soften your excitement, you unconsciously decide which version of your joy is safe to share. But over time, that subtle self editing starts to erode emotional safety. And social media intensifies this dynamic in ways we don't always talk about. Curated online lives increase comparison and friendship based envy, particularly among women and younger audiences, where visibility into other people's milestones is constant. It means jealousy doesn't just live in private conversations anymore. It gets activated in real time through highlight reels, announcements, posts, and silent scrolling. And what starts online doesn't usually stay online. It follows people back into real life friendships, shaping how support is expressed or withheld. But here's the part that often gets missed in all of this. Not all jealousy is malicious. In fact, a lot of it is deeply human. Some research suggests jealousy often points to unmet needs, unspoken fears, maybe insecurities, or unprocessed self worth wounds. In some cases, it can even be an invitation for growth if it's acknowledged with awareness instead of acted out through comparison or even withdrawal. But awareness is the key word here, because when jealousy stays unspoken, it doesn't disappear, it distorts connection. And that distortion is what creates distance. Not dramatic endings, not explosive conflict, just a quiet shifting of energy where you no longer feel fully met, fully seen, or even fully safe to expand. And that's really what this conversation is about. Learning to notice when a relationship is asking you to shrink in order to maintain ease, and choosing not to confuse that with love or loyalty, friendship, or closeness. Let me bring this into something real you can actually recognize in your own life. Think about the friend who used to light up the moment you shared good news, the one who didn't even wait for you to finish the sentence before they were celebrating you. And now it's different. There's a pause. Oh, that's great. That doesn't quite land the way it used to. Or maybe they pivot the moment back to themselves, like your moment was just a doorway into theirs. Or maybe you notice that you started editing your wins because you even say them just to keep the energy in the room comfortable. That's usually where envy in relationships starts to quietly shape behavior. Not an obvious betrayal, no dramatic exits here, subtle emotional withdrawals that slowly change the texture of connection. And without realizing it, you adapt. You start sharing less frequently. Start sharing less freely. You celebrate in quieter ways. You shrink your joy just enough so the reaction you get won't feel disappointing. And I want to be very clear with you here. Your growth is not the disruption. Your expansion is not the problem. What's actually happening is that your growth is revealing what's already unspoken in the dynamic. It's shining light on something that was always there, just not activated. From a counseling and emotional awareness perspective, envy isn't inherently something that makes someone bad. A lot of psychological research on jealousy and envy shows it can come from insecurity, maybe comparison, maybe emotional needs that were unmet. And in some cases, when it's consciously recognized, it can actually become something that leads to self-awareness and growth. So it's not a bad thing. But that requires ownership of your feelings, and not everyone is there. So your responsibility is not to fix it. Your responsibility is to notice it, because this isn't about labeling people toxic or good or bad. This is about alignment. It's about understanding that some people can only meet you at the version of you they first bonded with. And that's okay. When you evolve beyond that, the relationship either expands with you or it resists you in quiet ways, even could end. And here's the part most people miss. Resistance doesn't always feel like conflict. It often feels like confusion at first, like you're not quite sure what changed, but you feel slightly less free than you used to. So let me ground this for you in something practical. If you're sensing unsupportive energy or passive shifts in how people respond to you, stop asking yourself, how do I get them to understand me better? Instead, ask, do I feel safe being fully expressed here? Because alignment doesn't require you to shrink your joy. Real support doesn't make you rehearse your happiness before you share it. And there's also an important distinction to make here. Sometimes people are adjusting to your growth. That's human. But there's a difference between someone who's stretching to meet you and someone who consistently pulls your light down to meet their comfort zone. Emotional intelligence is learning to feel that difference without second guessing yourself out of what you already know deep down inside. So here's your reset point. Stop over-explaining what your intuition is already picking up. Your body will often register misalignment before your mind has language for it. That little tightening when you share something exciting, the hesitation before you tell certain people your next move, that sense of bracing instead of opening, that's not overthinking. That is information. And your action is actually simple, even if it takes courage. Choose reciprocity. Choose relationships where joy is returned, not managed. Choose people who don't just tolerate your growth, but meet it, match it, and expand with it. I personally remember a moment in my own life when I shared something I was really proud of, something I had worked hard for and was genuinely excited to celebrate. But instead of the reaction I expected, I was met with a very measured response from a friend who, I later realized, had been wanting that same accomplishment for herself. At first, there was no obvious hostility, just a subtle shift, a quiet distance, and then eventually a full break in the friendship. We were, frankly, no longer compatible as friends. Initially, I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I was reading too much into it. But over time, I realized I wasn't reacting to a single moment. I was noticing a pattern. I could see the gradual pullback and emotional distancing that seemed to happen as I moved into a better place in my own life. And the takeaway for me was very simple, but it was really powerful too. If I have to constantly translate my joy just to make it easier for someone else to receive, then I'm not in a safe place for my growth. And being in a safe space is really important. So let's ground this. I want you to take this in slowly. Your relationships are meant to feel like expansion, not restriction. And from that place, I want to leave you with this affirmation. Repeat after me. I am safe to grow. I am safe to grow. I am safe to grow. And I want you to really let that sink in, not as a nice affirmation, but as a new internal standard. Because when you start to believe that, you stop negotiating your light in different rooms. You stop shrinking yourself depending on who's watching. You stop performing acceptable versions of your happiness. Instead, you begin to notice something powerful. You stop overthinking how people will react before you share good news. You stop dimming your excitement just to keep the room emotionally comfortable. The right people don't require you to translate your joy. They recognize it instantly. They meet you in it. They expand with you, and they don't make your growth something to manage. They make it something to celebrate. And slowly, you start building a new emotional baseline for your life. One where safety isn't about avoiding discomfort. It's about no longer abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. So here's the closing truth. Soft jealousy is not always loud enough to confront, but it's always loud enough to notice if you are paying attention. And the goal is not to become suspicious of everyone. The goal is to become anchored enough in yourself that you no longer override your intuition just to maintain a connection. Because the right people won't ask you to shrink. They'll meet you where you're expanding. And if someone can't celebrate your becoming, it's not your job to slow down your life just to keep them comfortable in yours. Thank you for spending this time with me and leaning into this conversation about soft jealousy and subtle energy shifts in friendships and the quiet ways our growth can change dynamics around us. Not everything is spoken out loud, but you can often feel it before you can name it. The real work is learning to pause, check in with yourself, and trust what feels aligned instead of shrinking your light to keep others comfortable. You can catch this episode and more Power Shot insights on Signals and Standards with Suzie across your favorite podcast platforms. And if this sparked something for you around friendship dynamics or self-trust, you can connect with me anytime through powercoachsuzie.com. Until next time, this is your reminder to watch for the signals and never, ever lower your standards. See you next time. For daily inspiration and practical advice, find me on social media at PowerCoachSuzie. Got questions or ideas for the show? Head to powercoachsuzie.com where you can connect with me, explore the blog, or learn more about what I do. This is Suzie signing off. Until next time, keep reading the signals and never, ever lower your standards.